Once you record, go ahead and start recording, and please put your microphones on mute. Welcome to the May 5th, 2021 edition of the Tualatin Historical Society's program. We have a really special guest today, Jack Estes. It's special to me. You'll see I'm wearing my Blue Ghost hat. It's in honor of my brother who served in Vietnam. Blue Ghost, by the way, they were organized in 1866 and they were reactivated for Vietnam from 1671. And this particular program has special meaning to me because my father was one of 14 kids.
Yeah, I think, let's have our meeting and then.
Let's not worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're recording this, so they must have it on their archives, the History Center.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have it in our archives. So as I was saying, we can hear anybody who talks, so we'll try to keep it quiet in the background if we can. This is particularly important to me. My father was one of 14 children, the only boy who didn't serve in World War II. And I'm one of 9 kids that my parents raised. I was the only one of the boys who didn't serve in Vietnam. So I have a tremendous emotional respect for those who have served us. And I'm just so happy that Jack is with us today. He's written 3 books. They're on your screen. He'll be talking about some of the articles that he's written and also Searching for Gurney, his most recent book today. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he actually was decorated and wounded even before he was 20 years old. So he brings a lot of, unfortunately, personal experience to the table when he talks to us about what he's going to talk to us today. So with that introduction, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and go back to the video part of it so I can bring Jack to the forefront and let him talk to us. And when we're done, there'll be an opportunity to ask him questions at the end. And so please be thinking about that when we get started. So Jack, I'm going to bring you up to the forefront, at least for the recording purposes. It may not be in your name or on your screen, but on my screen, you're numero uno.
Okay, you're recording this, so we'll get a copy of it eventually.
Yes, you will.
Well, I want to say that I appreciate the opportunity to speak with folks from the Oregon Historical Society. I know it's been a big part of my wife and her family's life, having grown up in Sherwood and Tualatin, and I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. I also want to make this a little more interactive and a little different than what I've done in other speaking engagements, in that after each piece I read, I'll open it up for a few questions. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about me, my background, and how I came to start writing about the war. Well, I grew up in Northeast Portland, went to Parkrose High School, and I graduated in 1967. And I was an athlete and a poor student, and I was involved in speech and drama, which I excelled at. And so I had a couple of scholarship opportunities for wrestling and baseball, and I ended up at Mount Hood Community College. So round about January of 1968, I was flunking out of college. I had no money, no job, no help from family, and my girlfriend at the time was pregnant. So with that in mind, I decided the thing that I needed to do was to join the Marine Corps. And at least in the Marine Corps, they would pay for the cost of our child to be born. And at the same time, it would give me time and essence to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I really had no deep perceptions about the dangers of Vietnam. I mean, I read a few stories, but I was involved in other things that teenagers do at that time, and that was the last thing I was thinking of. And in fact, I didn't know where Vietnam was or what we were fighting for. So I joined the Marine Corps in 1968, and eventually was sent to Vietnam. I did my 13 months in Vietnam, and when I came home, my young wife left me, and primarily because she was frightened of what I had become by being in combat during my entire tour. The first 6 months were spent in the jungles of Vietnam and the mountains, and the only Vietnamese I saw were the ones that we killed. And then the last 6 months, I was transferred to a combined action platoon, which was a group of 10 Marines and 15 villagers called Popular Force Soldiers. And I thought that going to the combined action platoon would be a lot easier than humping in the jungle and be a lot safer. Well, I soon learned that that was incorrect. And so I did my tour. I came home. My wife had left me, and I decided that I better go back to school. I went to Portland State University and was there when they had all the riots. And as I said earlier, I was involved in the speech team at Park Rose and got involved in the speech team at Portland State University and creative writing classes. And I started writing about Vietnam, writing about the impact it had on me and other veterans, and some of their educational benefits and other benefits they had, and compared them to World War II. And I was seeing some really great success in these speech tournaments. And I was part of our Portland State team that went to nationals in Nebraska. And back in nationals, I was involved in two events: oral interpretation, and that's reading literature. And I read about the war, or poems and things of that nature, and also persuasive speaking. And I wrote my first real speech about Vietnam. Well, I won nationals in two events, was awarded an academic scholarship to Southern Illinois University, which had a wonderful communications department. And I went back there and continued to have some success in speech. But I was having trouble in my mind. And I ended up, after a year and a half at Southern Illinois, dropping out and coming back to Portland. So after a number of months and years, I started working on my first book, A Field of Innocence. And that's kind of the genesis of what was involved in my beginning to write. And I never wrote a book, of course. So this memoir was in first person, and it was eventually published by Brighton Bush Books, and then sold overseas and sold to Warner Book. And that's the picture that you saw on the previous screen. So I also began writing essays, and here's an essay that I wrote about 10 years old, and I think this was in the Los Angeles Times. I don't recall right now, but I'd like to share this with you. And I want people to ask questions or comment on what it was like for them and what their experiences were during that time, and any memories they may have about their about themselves or their fathers in World War II or, children, and maybe people that they know that are in Iraq or Afghanistan now. This is just titled simply Last Night. Last night, when the moon was gone and the neighborhood quiet, I grabbed my coat and walked down the hill towards Wilderness Park. With me was my squad of young soldiers, dead and wounded, still living in my memory. The air was wet and cool as they followed me down the block, gliding under streetlights and sliding past parked cars. At the bottom of the hill, we turned silently into the thick, dark woods. As a Marine in Vietnam, I hated moonless nights in the jungle. It was impossible to see. My imagination would soar. I could hear my heart beat and feel the adrenaline surge. Dug in on the side of a mountain, trees became shadows and shadows moved, and the wind was enemy, brushing through the broadleaf. Back then, my squad leader, Gurney, was in the hole next to me. Buddy and Tiny and a kid named Pigpen were invisible down the line. The snap of a twig was an enemy footstep, but Gurney warned, if you throw a grenade, you best have a body in the morning. After all these years, I long for moonless nights. I like walking with my squad as we edge deeper into the darkness. These are gentle woods, I know, but jungle memories still hang in the chilled evening air. I can feel my brothers frozen in time and imagine our younger days as we fought in the mountains near Khe Sanh and in the villages near Da Nang. I remember their names and faces and the cruel, violent last moments of their lives. Gurney was shot in the throat. Tiny hit by a rocket, taking Pigpen with him. Buddy was different. He was psychologically wounded, but it took 20 years for him to die from a drug overdose in Boston. I walked softly along the well-used path and tried to recall how my rifle felt, the heaviness of my pack, and what it was like to be so powerful. Tiny was huge and carried the machine gun easily, cradled in his arms like a child. Pigpen followed him, weighted down with extra ammo, and a love for Tiny only soldiers know. My squad is my youth, and some died in my arms like Gurney. I recall him just as clearly as my wife's sweet lips and the touch of her skin. I can tell you the color of Gurney's hair and the look in his eyes as his life faded. I've told her all the stories and written all the stories, and she has listened and pulled me close when the war was too real. I don't want my squad injured anymore. I want them standing strong, rifles ready, and that comforts me. I moved carefully through the park up a slight hill to a ridge I know, where the ground is flat and even. A deer rushed by, breaking my reverie, reminding me of something long lost. It's harder going down the hill now that I am over 60. I moved slowly, catching onto branches, bracing for a fall. Then I thought about another war where our soldiers fight in countries full of sand and suicide. They are still coming home in silver boxes, draped with flags, surrounded by stiff salutes, where they stagger back to family, arms and legs missing and faces burned away. At breakfast, I read about another Oregon boy who died in Iraq. He was handsome and bright, but is living inside some other soldier now. Perhaps someday, this soldier too will be saved by a woman's touch. It's my autumn ache when leaves turn and the gold and red maples are shredding. Last night, when the moon disappeared, I walked in the woods with my squad, closing in on another memory. So I'm welcome to questions or comments now. And please don't be bashful.
I'll speak up if I may. Thank you for that. I enjoyed it. And as my age put me at the end of Vietnam and I didn't have to go. So those descriptions you made and the memories you have from that story are not part of my experience. So it was a pleasure to hear that.
Thank you, Jeff Welsh.
Now I'd like to read a little bit from Searching for Gurney.
Yeah, Jack, before you go on, I just again want to reiterate what Jeff said, because I graduated in '68. And this is what the boys in my graduating class had to look forward to. I mean, it was one of these things that they were drafting quite a few. So I appreciate that. And you and I were on the speech team together at Portland State. That's where I know you. Thank you so much thank you so much for your beautiful writing.
Well, I wish I could see your face. So, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you for serving.
Thank you for serving is from Alan Stewart.
Well, as Ross mentioned earlier, this is my third book, Searching for Gurney. The first one was A Field of Innocence, which is a memoir about my time as a soldier in Vietnam. And then my second book was A Soldier's Son, and that was published in 2016, and it was a novel. And Searching for Gurney is a novel, and I'll just read a few passages from it.
Hey, Jack, before you get started, I'm monitoring the chat room here too, in case someone doesn't want to speak out loud. And Augusta Miller wanted to thank you for sharing the important information for their generation and helping them understand better. And eventually, maybe before you're done today, Augusta Miller would also like to hear you talk about any local interactions you may have had with the Vietnamese, and if speaking French actually helped you. The timing may not be right for you to address that, but just keep that in the back of your mind and I'll remind you if you don't get to it.
Well, I would be happy to speak about living with Vietnamese, because as I mentioned earlier, I lived in the villages for 6 months, and my understanding about the war, I believe, was much deeper and richer, and I grew to create an affinity for the Vietnamese. And I love the people overall, and they hated the war in and of itself. And some of the Vietnamese were Viet Cong, so that made it very difficult. And but I'll speak to that later, and I appreciate the question.
Okay, thank you.
JT woke, but they were still dead. 17 dead, 2 wounded, 2 missing. The dream stuck in his mind. Rice paddies, jungle, tree line exploding. He got up, head pounding, pulse racing, thinking, go to the baby's room. In the hallway, he could see Marines face down, others mangled and broken boned. Anna's bedroom was scattered with the dead. Her crib was tucked in the corner, nightlight on the dresser, clowns and zebras dancing across her wall. The soldiers disappeared. He picked her up. He felt safe holding her in the darkness. Anna reminded him he was home. They sat in the rocking chair in front of the window. Soon the moon dropped below the trees and he kept rocking her until morning. Sunlight moved through the windows and swept across the wooden floor as he placed Anna in her crib. Quietly, he returned to Ashley's side. Rolling in her sleep, she reached instinctively, pulling him close. Soon his mind drifted to the night Anna was born. He was in Vietnam, deep in the jungle, dug in on the side of a mountain not far from Khe Sanh. The day had been long and hard. His company was cutting and hacking through terrain so steep ropes were needed to pull each other up. They set in to form a perimeter as the sun disappeared. He was digging his fighting hole when the radio message blew across the world to headquarters, out to the field before passing from marine to marine in the dark. Finally, it reached him. "JT," his squad leader whispered. "Red Cross radioed. Don't flip out, man. But they say your old lady had a baby." He felt Ashley's cold feet run along his legs, his mind locked on that amazing night. He imagined her in some clean white hospital bed, laying back, pushing life into the world. And he was in the jungle, 8,000 miles away, digging a hole. They were both 19. Back then, JT thought that God ruled everything. It was simple. If he woke up in the morning, it was a bonus, and everything else was meaningless. Now he was home. The world seemed complicated, out of control. Nothing made any sense. JT rolled to his side and touched Ashley's face. He wanted to kiss her and be inside of her. But then he heard the tenant upstairs walk across the floor, pause, and flush the toilet. They lived on the main floor of an old 2-story house that had been converted into 3 separate apartments. Pearl, who was 80 and senile, lived in the basement with her big brown cat. Dwayne, his wife Megan, and their baby took the top flat. The house was 50 years old, but well maintained, with green shag carpet, shiny hardwood floors, high ceilings, and an ancient furnace that clanked and chugged like an old steam engine. The front yard was small, with a couple of trees and a few red rose bushes running around the perimeter. There was a front porch with a hanging swing that looked out on the yard and street. A detached garage, leaning hard, ready to fall, stood at the end of the driveway. Dwayne kept some tools in there, and on nice days, he'd work on his car in the driveway or fix neighbors' cars for a few extra bucks. JT's home was just outside the Portland city limits in a quiet blue-collared neighborhood full of big, older homes that had been deteriorating for years. It was affordable and an easy walk to a park, shopping, a couple of taverns and churches. You could catch the bus at the end of the block. That summer it was warm. Folks barbecued in backyards and hung laundry on sagging clotheslines next to gardens of corn, tomatoes, and squash. The smell of hot briquettes and hamburgers floated over fences and mixed with the sweet smell of pot drifting. It was hippie and hard hats living side by side in the summer of '69. JT lay in bed, relishing the feel of fresh sheets, listening to the shower run upstairs. He rolled over to Ashley, kissed her awake, and lifted her 90. Soon he was touching her breasts, and inside feeling strong. He loved as she moaned, and when he released, he was happy, so happy he wanted to cry. For over 13 months in Vietnam, he'd never felt secure. Not once had he closed his eyes and drifted into a deep sleep. maybe in the hospital, but cries from the other wounded would wake him. Now he was back in the world, making love to his wife and holding his child. Thank God. Searching for Gurney, well, first of all, do you have any other comments or any questions you'd like to discuss? Maybe just tell a memory that you had a soldier, a veteran, a Marine. I think everyone else would like to hear those stories.
This is Ross. There may be other veterans, but I know for sure that Dale Potts is online, and I do know that he is a veteran. Dale, would you like to comment? You're on mute right now, so if you do, you'd have to undo that. But certainly anybody who is a vet is welcome to comment.
And anyone that is not a vet.
Or if you're not a vet, for sure. Well, while people are getting their thoughts together, let me ask you a question. And that is, because of the very almost like personal nature of that passage from the book, not that it's necessarily you, but were you in Nam when your child was born?
Yes. She was, as I said, the message came from the United States and blew across the world and ended up in headquarters and passed along through radios to me out in the jungle. And that's how I first learned about that. And that was the very same, the Red Cross did that kind of thing, which was utterly amazing. And
how long did it take you to get that information that you had a child that was born?
Actually the same day.
Wow.
But I didn't receive pictures of her for, I don't know, I think it was maybe several weeks, but I kept that, I kept her baby picture with me during the entire tour. And one time when we were hit very hard and I had to rush to my fighting hole, where I had been laying down, got hit with a rocket or a mortar, and everything was destroyed. My pack was destroyed, except for that picture. So that was very meaningful to me. And of course, my child is a grown woman and lives in Oregon City. So the Searching for Gurney is basically the story of 4 veterans. 3 of them are Marine Corps veterans, and 1 is a Vietnamese soldier. His name is Vong, and I'm going to read a bit about Vong. Vong, and this takes place in Hoa Binh, Vietnam in 1950. Nguyen Vong was born in a bamboo hut with dirt floors in the village of Hoa Binh. It was spring of the year of the tiger, and he was the first son, which was a good sign, even though his birth was difficult. His father Diep was a member of the Viet Minh, a resistant front struggling against the French colonists. When Vong was born, Diep was 50 miles north in Hanoi training with troops for the revolution. On the night Vong's spirit chose his parents and came into the world, his mother, Twee, was in great pain. Her baby was turned slightly, nearly breech, and the baby fought to be steady. There was no doctor to tend her, only grandmother and another old woman from the village. 2 oil lamps in the room, casting shadows on the family altar, and the wooden bed covered with a mat where Twee lay. Grandmother sat on the side of the bed, wiping Twee's forehead and sang a quiet song as Twee clenched her teeth and pushed down on her swollen belly. The village midwife was tending the fire in the only other room where a pot of water boiled. When the baby finally came, it was still dark, but a cock crowed, which was a good sign. Grandmother said, the afterbirth was put in a large soup bowl beneath the bed, and at first light, grandmother buried it in the family's garden. It had been a family tradition believed to honor the earth, passed on for generations. Excuse me. For the next few years, Vong grew up never traveling far from the scattered huts and fields of his village. When he was an infant, his mother would strap him on her back and work the rice paddies or turn the garden. Other times, he'd lie happily on a blanket underneath the shade of a coconut tree, smiling towards the sun. His father would come home and bounce Vong on his knees while grandmother sang. Sometimes his father would play his flute while swinging from a hammock stretched between the bamboo poles that framed their doorway. But his father's time at home became less frequent as the war escalated. In 1953, French planes began bombing close to their village, so the family built an underground bunker. When the planes came, his mother and grandmother would hurry him along outside and make it a game, challenging Vong to see how fast he could crawl down inside the bunker. Each time his mother would say he was very fast for a small boy, and give him a sweetbread or banana and pat his head gently. They had mats on the floor, a bucket of water, food in woven baskets, and a thing he did not yet understand called a rifle. In the winter of that year, his brother Vic was born on the floor of the bunker, but the birth was not good. Vong sat in the corner, his back against the dirt wall, the oil lamp flickering. Planes roared overhead and explosions rang as the ground shuddered. Keep your mouth open, Vong, his grandmother warned, so the concussion would not blow out his eardrums. The bombs came again and again. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. The explosions sent shockwaves through the earth. Finally, the planes left, and the bunker was quiet. Vong was covered with dirt. He had wet himself, and he was crying. There was too much blood from his mother, and she died without a whimper. But Vic survived. A few days later, Vong's father came down from Hanoi. Twee was buried in a family gravesite next to her father. There was great sadness in the family, and for a long time, his grandmother did not sing. In 1954, Vong was working side by side with his grandmother in the rice fields. Vic was under the shade of a banana tree, lying on his back, grabbing fistfuls of air and kicking his tiny feet. The water in the fields was brown and knee-deep, touching the edge of Vong's shorts. They were planting and she was singing again, covered from the sun by her conical hat. Their water bowl strolled lazily beside them, his big head and horns swaying rhythmically as they walked. At midday, a farmer from the other Field came over and told his grandmother word had come that Vong's father was in an important battle far away. That night, grandmother put a special offering on the family altar with the pictures of her late husband and daughter. She prayed that Dieppe would come home safely. For months, Vong and his family did not see Dieppe. He was at Dien Bien Phu fighting the French, who had a large base surrounded by mountains and backing to the China Sea. Tens of thousands of peasants cut trails and broke artillery pieces down, carrying them through the jungle. In the mountains, they surrounded the French base. They strapped pieces on their backs or on bicycles, packing them to their positions to rain terror on Dien Bien Phu. Dieppe was wounded twice. Thousands died from malaria. French planes and hand-to-hand combat, but the pounding continued. And in May of 1954, the French surrendered. When Dieppe returned, he came home a hero and was given a higher rank in the local Communist Party. Under his direction, the village and district grew and prospered. Over the next several years, a silk manufacturing plant was built in Hoa Ben, and other industries were brought in as well. Roads were constructed, as well as a new school, medical center, and a canal system that made it possible to flood the fields more efficiently. Soon the family was a new home made from concrete with a red tile roof. They had bountiful fields, pigs, chickens, and 2 water bowls. Vong and Biek enjoyed a life free of worry. They played in the fields or swam in the river that ran from the edge of the mountains towards their home. On Saturdays, they would go to the market. Sometimes their grandmother, sometimes they were guided by their grandmother and buy ice cream or a small toy sold by vendors. They missed their mother, but were guided by their grandmother's steady hand and firm direction. A task must be done well, or there is no honor, she would say. Dieppe was a self-taught man, a Confucian scholar, who often read books by candlelight late into the night. He instilled in his son a love of country and discipline. Each Sunday, the boys would gather with Dieppe and he would talk about the 5 cardinal principles of ethics: benevolence, duty, propriety, conscience, and faithfulness. To illustrate, he would tell elaborate stories of ancient Chinese heroes riding on lumbering elephants with swords drawn, or tales of soldiers who fought against the French. But it was not long before a new struggle began, the reunification of the country under Ho Chi Minh. In the summer of 1962, Dieppe was sent to the south as part of the Viet Cong movement to disrupt the current government and create infrastructure for military attacks. All of this would lead to the primary goal of unification. On the night before he was to leave, he took Vong and Bick down to the river, where they sat on the bank and talked. It was nearly dusk, and a few fishermen were unloading sampans. The fields were empty, and the distant mountains seemed at peace, settling in for the evening.
So if we'll follow the format that Jack has set for us, any comments or questions for Jack now?
I have,
Comment again, if I may.
who am I fighting with here? This is Nancy.
Nancy, go ahead.
Jack, I don't really have any experience with Vietnam, except I graduated in 1965 from LOHS, and one of my classmates, Andy Abramson, died in Vietnam, and Abramson Field at Lake Ridge High School is named after him. I would like to know a little bit more about how you got started writing. I love your writing, and I think for women especially, who really, at least for me, I don't have a lot of experience with Vietnam except what, you know, the media presented to us.
Okay, well, as I had mentioned earlier, I started writing, well, basically in college, and that was when I was competing on the speech team, and wrote speeches, and
So it developed from there.
excuse me.
So your writing novels developed from the writing of speeches.
My speeches that I delivered, and also I was in persuasive speaking, and that's when you had to get up there and speak for about 10 minutes about a topic that was important to you. And my topic was Vietnam. So I learned to write basically at Portland State, and that carried over when I transferred to Southern Illinois University. And then, of course, I wrote my first book, A Field of Innocence, and I really had some great help. Actually, the person that's helped me the most of my life is my wife. She was a literature major and graduated from the University of Oregon, and she actually read the first draft of my book of Field of Innocence, and she helped me a great deal in refining my writing, and she's edited a lot of my writing, most of it, to tell you the truth, and she's helped me greatly, even though we did have a few heated discussions on certain elements. But now there was another question that Yoda had up there, and I'll answer that if I can see it again.
Did Yoda have one up there? Art, did you put one up
Someone
there?
had a question up there.
There's a couple of questions. One is more of a statement from Dale Potts. Today's generation seems to not know anything about Vietnam and other significant U.S. historical events. Jack's books help share what happened in Vietnam. So that I think is more of a comment than a question, unless Dale wants to add something to that. And then he had some computer things going on in the chat room, which he's resolved in the meantime. Art, he seemed to think that there was a question from you. I know Larry had one, and maybe somebody else did too. Art?
Well, I saw it up on the screen.
Oh, okay.
It was a good question. I just forgot what it was.
I don't see it.
Anyway.
But Art's still with us. So Art, do you want to jump in? There he is. Did you have a question? You're on mute right now.
Your relationship with Karl Marlantes, the author of Matterhorn.
Oh yeah, you wanted to know of my relationship with Karl?
Yeah, do you know him? Do you interact? Do you?
I know Karl very well.
Yeah.
And in fact, Karl's first manuscript of his first book, Matterhorn, I read, and my wife did some editing on it, and I met Karl through my wife, who was taking a yoga class from Karl's wife. And you know, over the years, I mean, that first manuscript was like 1,400 pages, and he learned to write you know, working on that book. And of course, he graduated from Ivy League school and was a Rhodes Scholar and very bright. And so I haven't talked to him on the phone for about a week. So
Okay.
we talk off and on, exchange emails, and he's been a very big supporter of me, and I greatly appreciate it. I also greatly appreciate that Tim O'Brien, are you familiar with Tim O'Brien?
Oh, yeah.
Did he write Bury Me with Soldiers?
What was that? Did he
There's
write
a
what?
book called Bury Me with Soldiers.
No, I don't think that was a book, but he wrote Going After Casciato, and he wrote his best book, I think, was The Things They Carry, you know, short
Yes.
vignettes about Vietnam. And, you know, he's written multiple books, a National Book Award winner, a wonderful author, and I'm very proud that I've got great reviews on the back of my books from both Carl and Tim O'Brien.
Fantastic.
So now what time do we have?
We really don't have a time limit per se. I think that there were at least one other question. Larry, did you have a question? Maybe one other? You're on mute, Larry, you're on mute.
And I had a question, Ross.
Okay, Sandra, why don't you go ahead while we wait for Larry to turn off his mute?
There we go. Okay.
Go ahead, Sandra.
I read your first book, your memoir, A Field of Innocence, Jack, and it was just an incredible story. And you wrote about some of the Vietnamese people that you met there. And I wondered if you had been in contact with them since that time, since you were there in Vietnam. I know that was a long time ago.
My wife and I formed a nonprofit organization called Fallen Warriors Foundation, which is, you know, we held 17 years of or more of veterans events, and we would have gatherings down at the beach of veterans and or their loved ones, and we did silent retreats led by Claude Anchin Thomas, who was a helicopter crew chief that was shot down over Vietnam like 4 or 5 times. And he would lead these silent retreats, as I said, with veterans and or their loved ones. And it was amazingly powerful. And so I think we had 17 of those retreats. And my wife and I did go back in 1993 to Vietnam. And I had, you know, wanted to go back to see my village, to see if any of the people I knew were alive, and to maybe find another soldier named Hin, a Vietnamese soldier named Hin, who helped save my life one night when we were attacked. And the thing that I would remember the most clearly is that he had a gold front tooth. And so I was able, through another veteran who was staying in Vietnam at that time, to have him help me find Vong. I mean, not Vong, but Hin. And my wife wanted me to go back to Vietnam, back to my original point of pain, she said, and to help me. And my kids wanted me to go back because they wanted to see me cry. So my wife and our 2 young children went to Vietnam. And then there were 3 other trips that I went back taking medical and educational supplies and toys and things of that nature. But when I got back there that first time, they had located him and he was afraid. And he wasn't going to come out to see me because he was afraid for me to come into the village. And so finally, after a number of days, others had convinced him, some Vietnamese, not that they knew me, but they knew my friend, and he agreed to come out and come to meet me first back at the hotel rather than me come to the village. And so this Vietnamese showed up, and he was quite frightened and spoke no English, and we had an interpreter. And it was hard for me to recognize him, although he looked vaguely familiar. And then he reached in his pocket and pulled out the gold tooth. Anyway, that was emotionally very powerful. And we went back to the village and back to where he lived, and he lived in the same area, in the same, very modest hut, and had a wife and kids. But everybody then thought I was very rich. And so they started asking me to build a new schoolhouse, build a medical center, if I would give them money to build a new road. But we ended up doing some modest things and kept it up for a number of years, and did build a small medical center and build a well and provided lots of medical and educational supplies. We sent over tons of medical and educational supplies, including computers. So that's that answer.
Thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing part of your life story. And thanks for asking that question, Sandra. Larry, did you have a question also before?
Just a comment. I appreciated your mentioning of the Vietnamese soldier and your reading there. And just to mention that we too traveled in Vietnam as tourists about 6 years ago on a guided tour. So we were shown what we were pre-planned to see. But I was impressed throughout that visit, north and south, how everyone there talked about the American war, not the Vietnam War.
Right.
And that's a lasting impression I'll always remember. Perspective is so important. And that's the way they were seeing it, and they still do, I'm sure.
Well, they had a war following the Vietnam War against the Chinese, and I think there was something like 1 million people killed. Now, I may be wrong on that statistic, but war was their life. And if we have a few more minutes, I don't want to, keep people. I have a couple of other things that I would like to read. But Ross, can you tell me what the time is?
Yeah, fine. We're good. People can check out when they want to, and you'll always be recorded on our webpage. So please share.
Okay, this will be another 10 minutes or so, and then we can have the final talk.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Thank you. This is the characters. This is the character JT again. The dream again. The patrol. NVA coming out of the tree line, stepping over bodies, firing. It always ended the same. Rifle jammed, shot in the face. It was still dark outside as Ashley lay next to him, sleeping peacefully, but JT was wide-eyed, sweating and alert. His heart was pumping hard and he could feel his pulse beat in his neck. The alarm clock flashed 4:10 a.m. He slid out of bed, pulled on a pair of running shorts and a t-shirt, then walked softly across the floor as Ashley turned beneath the covers. He moved like he was on patrol, gliding as he stepped, tuned into every shadow and sound. His face tightened as he listened to the walls move and the floor breathe. In Anna's room, he stood over her crib, watching the nightlight cast a faint glow on her round, sleepy face. He reached into the crib and adjusted her blankets, gently touching her with the back of his hand. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers. He left the room quietly. The front of the house was cold, but the darkness was comfortable. He felt in control in the dark. He dropped to the floor and did push-ups until he could no longer lift his body. This helped shove the handfuls of blood and broken teeth out of his mind. But the effort felt harder than his body remembered. In boot camp, he had done 100 without slowing down. Now he could only do 50. He was growing soft. So he did more sit-ups and forced more push-ups. He was safe, alone in the dark. Before Vietnam, JT believed he was different from his peers because his dad was a drunk and his mother was crazy. She had two nervous breakdowns and was a joke to his friends. One friend called her marijuana. Her name was Mary. He'd say, "How's marijuana doing today?" Meaning, did your mom flip out again? More sit-ups, and he saw his mother in that hospital bed, arms stretched, eyes rolled back in her head, screaming, "I've been through hell. I've been through hell." And he couldn't help her. His father was embarrassing. He'd go to work at his auto body shop, fixing and painting cars, and come home after work drunk. Once he'd fallen out of the bleachers at JT's wrestling match. JT believed other kids were looking at his father disdainfully and judging him at the same time. He wanted to escape, get away, and do something important. He thought going to war might make a difference. He'd be a man. He'd know things others didn't. I'm going to read a little bit more about the other characters. This character's name is Hawkeye. It's in Chicago. This chapter opens in Chicago, 1968. On the day before his 19th birthday, Jesse James Joseph Hawkeye Collins stood handcuffed in front of a Chicago Circuit Court judge, waiting to be sentenced for assault and battery, carrying a concealed weapon, a knife, and burglary. He had on turquoise slacks, a black long-sleeved silk shirt, and white tennis shoes. A thick gold chain wrapped around his powerful neck and shined against his black skin. He had a huge, sorry about that phone. He had a huge afro and looked like he should be pimping whores on the south side of town. He'd been busted twice this year, last time in a bar on Rush Street. He was chatting up some fine-looking lady in a tight mini when her estranged boyfriend came up. He called the girl a bitch and shugged Hawkeye. A fight broke out and Hawkeye ended up in jail for assault and carrying a false ID. He did 30 days in city lockup, before overcrowding pushed him back on the streets. During that 30-day gig, about the only thing to do was read paperbacks. He dusted off 18 books in 30 days, which helped ease his frustration and anger. This time his mother was crying openly, sitting in the front of the court and next to a Marine Corps recruiting officer. Despite the cuffs and the situation, Hawkeye, as he liked to be called, had a big cocky grin on his face, as if he were about to receive the commendation for Citizen of the Year instead of a prison sentence. "Mr. Collins," the judge snapped indifferently, while sifting through Hawkeye's file, "wipe that smile off your face." Hawkeye obliged, shifting his weight back and forth on the balls and heels of his feet, seeming more bored than concerned. "Mr. Collins, this is no joke. I can have you incarcerated for years." Hawkeye shook his head and laughed quietly at the floor. Doing time didn't bother him, what the fuck? But sensing he might be compounding his grief, he looked up at the judge, real serious-like. "Yes, Your Honor, I know I messed up. Mr. Collins, I have letters here from your mother and teachers at the high school from which you were expelled. They said that despite your incorrigible behavior, you are worth saving." This seemed to somewhat please the judge as he shuttled through more papers, stacking them neatly on his desk and reading another letter. What the letters didn't say was that school came easy for Hawkeye, and it was boring. Of course, not having a dad or siblings helped compound his feelings of being different. He also had another little problem, or gift, depending on how you looked at it. He had a photographic memory. It came in handy when listening to classroom lectures or reading textbooks. The problem side was having total recall for events that shaped his life, especially when they were not pretty, like seeing his cousin Clarence stabbed in the eye with a fork when he was 4. They had been in a restaurant just down the block from their house, eating pie and ice cream. Clarence was 13 and was babysitting. He was also dealing heroin for his older brother. 3 Chicanos walked in and up to the table, teenagers wearing brown berets. One had a thin mustache, hands in his coat pockets. He dipped his shoulders when he talked. "Blackie, you dealing in the wrong location." Then he ripped a fork off the table and shoved it in Clarence's eye, and they all ran out the door. There was Clarence, bent over the table, hand covering his eyes, screaming. Hawkeye could remember it all, everything, perfectly, even the pattern of the blood running down on Clarence's hand and into the pie. The last thing I'm going to read is an essay that was published just after, well, about 4 years ago, in the Wall Street Journal. And the essay had a picture of the 3 American soldiers out on a patrol that's next to the wall in Washington, D.C. In 1968, I was 18 years old, flunking out of school, and my girlfriend was pregnant. Then I joined the Marine Corps and went to Vietnam. When a rocket hit the mess hall, half full of young Marines, I was about 200 yards away. I saw it pass overhead, long and white, and heard the explosion. I'd only been in country a few days and knew no one. Some of the boys were placed in body bags and trucked out, as I recall. Now I'm old and beat up. moving towards another Memorial Day. I'm thinking about the Marines I did know and wondering what their lives would have been like if they had survived. Gurney was he was my first squad leader in Vietnam, and I spent a lot of time over the decades thinking about him. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He quoted memorized lines from movies. One night he told me he had once taken an R&R to Hawaii and flown home to get married. The next day, our company was flown out in choppers to the jungle for a big operation. Our squad was leading as we hacked through elephant grass up to our waists and began the ascent up the mountain. The jungle was thick and hot as we climbed. I was scared and worried about getting shot in the face. Gurney was on point. Forrest followed, and I was behind him. Soon we were on a well-used trail where enemy had carved out steps and built bamboo guardrails, which was very frightening. Gurney and Forrest disappeared around the bend, and soon the firing came. Forrest yelled up ahead, "He's hit! Gurney's hit!" When we found Gurney, he was lying on his back, eyes open, with a startled look on his face. He had a hole in his neck with a white cord hanging from it. "He's dead," I said, as Forrest was shaking. What would Gurney have done with his life? If he had moved an inch or two and the bullets whizzed by, he might have lived. He'd have come home to his young wife's kisses. He could have read books and walked on beaches and had children and some kind of fulfilling career. I know he used to surf. I'll imagine him as a surfer or actor or director making movies about war and how families feel when their soldiers don't come home. Over 58,000 died in that damn war. Some were boys from the city or young men from Midwest farms like Tiny. He was big and strong and carried a machine gun. His best bud hauled Tiny's extra ammo, and I nicknamed him Pigpen. We all laughed about that. They reminded me of blue-collar guys who drink beer after working a day shift at the warehouse. They both died when a rocket-propelled grenade hit Tiny directly. Forrest saw it. But I'll pretend they're alive and remain close pals, that they went into business and owned a string of gas stations, and their boys played baseball, and they sat in the stands, ate hot dogs, and cheered. Simple stuff we take for granted. What if Jimmy from Georgia hadn't been killed? When he was first wounded, I helped him on the chopper and the enemy kept firing and I dived off. What if Jimmy didn't get shot again and didn't die as the chopper landed? And suppose 20 years later, I never called his parents to tell them how he died. What if his sister didn't fly into town to meet the man who once knew her dead brother? Hodges was wounded and Recon and Happy and Doc too. I don't know what happened to any of them. But I saw them bleeding as we helped them to the chopper. Charlie Young took a round through the throat like Gurney, and shrapnel ripped through Bo's head. Bob was shot 4 times. Today, he walks with a limp and has a useless arm and a slew of grandchildren. We were best friends during the war, and I tied his shattered arm together with my sock. One night our squad was set in a village overlooking a graveyard when we were attacked. Corporal Swan ran shirtless outside of a grass hut and took one round through the heart. I heard him say, "Oh my God," as he fell next to me. If he had lived, would he have come home damaged inside the way some did and still do? I won't imagine that. These are all young men I lived with and fought with and think of on Memorial Day. When the picnics are over and the beer has stopped flowing and the flags have been picked up at all the graveyards, memory brings them back to life. They sweep into my dreams or visit when I'm walking in the woods with Grant.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for your service. I have well, I'll have a closing in just a second, but I have something that's kind of provocative. Augusta Miller had posted it, and it's not really a question. Augusta just said that they would recommend the Kinsburn Vietnam War series, which I've actually seen. It's quite good, and some of the insights into the perhaps terrible political decisions that were made leading to the extended conflict, based on a failed domino theory assumption. And I'm a lover of history and happen to know that the domino theory was an extension ultimately of the Truman Doctrine, which said we had to contain communism, which had us take actions in Greece and in Korea, and then eventually Vietnam too, which would, we got to contain the Soviet Union and China and so forth. So after all that you've been through and all that you've shared with everyone, was it worth it?
Was it worth it? Well, I'll tell you. When I was in Vietnam, we weren't thinking about the political aspects of the war. And we weren't necessarily thinking about democracy or freedom or liberty, but we were there together. A large portion of us were there because they had been drafted, and others that had been volunteers, like Carl Melantis and me. And we developed relationships with young men that have created both good and terrible memories. I happen to have saved some lives, and I'm very thankful for that. And I suffered and sacrificed and grew into a man. I'm thankful for that. And then I came back and I wanted to help through our foundation, and I wanted to write to help honor the memories of American soldiers and to help heal the pains of war. And so I believe that saying that it was worth it, there might be a better word for that, but I'm proud of the service. I'm proud of how I served, and I'm very proud of the great sacrifices that other men did. And I'm thankful for the ability to convey messages and you know, to veterans and to families. And I want to show them what war is really all about and be truthful. And so I guess I'm proud of that. That's how I'll answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. And thank you for sharing the stories. I actually have all three of your books on order myself because they're not only myself, but people in my family will be interested in reading those memories. I want to remind the group that this will probably be on our YouTube channel before it appears on our webpage. Go to YouTube and type in Tualatin Historical Society, and we have videos there. It takes us a few more days to get it up on the webpage, but as soon as you get to our homepage, it'll be there. And a recording will be made available to you, Jack and Colleen. We'll figure out a way to make that happen. So is there anything else that anybody would like to add in closing before we finish with our very distinguished guest today, Jack Estes?
Can I be heard, Yvonne?
Yeah, go ahead, Yvonne.
I just want to thank you, Jack. I've been bragging about you and Colleen for many years, and so glad that we could get you to connect back to Tualatin. And I'm very proud of what you did. I'm proud of the O'Callahans and the Galway Hills. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I do have just a couple quick notes. Annie Bloom's book is carrying my books. You can order them, of course, on Amazon. And if you don't like Amazon, Barnes and Noble carries it. I'm not sure if they're carrying all three right now. And if you've heard of Ingram Sparks, they carry it. And that's a very large distribution publisher and company. And I would like, of course, all of you, you know, if you have questions or comments, to send me an email, and especially Margaret, because I want to reminisce about Portland State. But thank you very much for being an attentive audience, and you know, ask me back again anytime. And also my fourth book, which I've been working on, is a collection of all the essays that I've had published over the years, along with new essays. So we'll let you know when that's ready.
Can you give us your email?
What?
Can you give us your email?
Oh yeah, it's Jack Estes at comcast.net.
Thank you.
That's great. I'll look forward to hearing from you, and you can ask me anything you want in an email, and I'll be there.
And Margaret had to leave a few minutes early, but I'll make sure she gets your message, Jack. And Jeff Welsh stuck in a quick thank you in the chat room. And Augusta wanted to know about a link for the YouTube, and I don't know what that is right now, but I can tell you, Augusta, that probably the easiest way to do it is just to, on YouTube, type in Tualatin Historical Society, and you'll find our channel, and that video will be there. Or alternatively, in a few more days, because it'll take a while, just go to our webpage, tualatinhistory.org, and go to programs, and this recording will be there. Actually, this recording will be right on our homepage. You'll land right on it. It'll take a few days, but you'll find it, okay?
Oh, also, what might be of interest to people is my website, which is simply jackestes.com. It has other essays on that, and pictures and stories, and our Fallen Warriors Foundation website got hacked, and I hope that we oh, it's terrible what they did. See, we let our website expire after 20 some years, and somebody
took it
up and did something horrible. So
oh boy,
you don't need to watch that.
Nancy is stuck in, Nancy Dunas is stuck in a thank you. And someone mentioned a Facebook feed, but this won't be on Facebook. We try to keep on social media, but the webpage and Facebook, we have stuff, but there won't be, well, why not? We could put a link on Facebook. Yeah, I can do that. We'll do that too.
That would be nice.
Yeah, we'll have it everywhere.
Twitter?
Okay, happy Memorial Day to everyone. Jack, thank you for remembering what we're all about, and thank you for your service. And for those of you who are watching today, who has served, thank you. And if you haven't served, but you supported the military, God bless you as well. So thanks all, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.